In this video, we're going to look at symmetry, reflections, and translations of shapes. The first image we have here shows us a dotted line, which is the mirror line for us to reflect this picture in. Now, when we have a diagonal mirror line, it can be a little bit tricky to draw. So what I like to do is I like to rotate my page, or in this case, the picture, until that mirror line is nice and vertical. And once I've got a vertical mirror line, it's much easier for me to see what I'm trying to mirror. I like to pick some key points. So I can see if I start at this point here, I'm going up and diagonally left to make this T shape. And you can see I'm reflecting this side and reflecting to make almost a square there. Then I have the bottom of my T shape and I can reflect the rest of my T shape in that picture. And you can see that that's identical on both sides. Let's move down to this green sort of bent square shape. So I know that I need to head diagonally down to the left, but it's not a straight line. You can see here it kind of curves a little bit. So we're going to see if we can copy that down out to the left, copying down out to the right. So we do a bit of a sketch there, and then matching on the other side. It's nice and easy for us to sketch these parts that are along that line of symmetry, but it's a bit trickier, like for this S shape, to figure out where that should go. So let's count the squares into the diagonal line. I've got one across diagonally, one square, two squares, three squares, and a half. So I need to match that on the other side. A half, one and a half, two and a half, three and a half. So I've got my three squares and a half. This is where I'm going to start drawing my S, and that's going to go diagonally down to the right, which is opposite the other one. Now I can get rid of that dotted line that I've used to help me place my piece. And we can continue to sketch. So now from this point here on my S, in the original image, I go down to the right, so I'm going to go down to the left. I'm going to do the opposite. And then we come to this corner, which is going back up towards the right, so we're going back up towards the left. Then the image from our next point goes down to the right, so we're going down to the left. And from the next point, we go down to the left, so we are going down to the left. And it's really helpful to draw these points in so you can visualize exactly where you are. Coming down to our next section, we can see we color in the rest of the square and the diagonal square next to it. Then we have this sort of orangey section. You can see that our grid here is not big enough to draw all of the image. So you can either continue to where that image would be drawn, or you can finish at the edge of the grid. Both options are okay. And then we just have this final S shape. So once again, let's count how many squares we are from this point here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 whole squares. So we'd go across 1, 2, 3. Oh, we've run out of space. 4, 5 whole squares. And it would be approximately here. But we can probably reflect a few of the other points a little bit easier that do fall on our grid. Let's try this point here. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. So 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. Yep, that lines up just here on our grid. And we can begin to connect those points, moving down in the opposite direction to where they were originally drawn. You can see that we're getting this really nice reflection going on, matching approximately like that. It's a bit tricky without the rest of the grid there, but we can erase the lines that we don't need, and we can see that nice reflection, beautifully symmetrical on both sides of our reflection line. So if your line of reflection is not vertical or horizontal, you can rotate your page to make it easy to see. The second part of our video, we're going to look at combining some translations and reflections, so a combined transformation. And I've got a little box down here which tells me which transformations we're going to make. We're going to start by translating this arrow, our object, 5 to the right and 2 spaces up. So let's pick a translation point. I'm going to pick the point of the arrow. So I'm going to move it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces right, 2 spaces up. And that's where my arrow point is going to be. You can translate a few more points if you want to. I'll draw a little triangle on this one, and that's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the right and 2 places up. We could draw a little cross on this corner, which is going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the right and 2 places up. And you can start to sketch in that first image, making sure that you count 3 squares for the height of the stem of the arrow so that it matches. And then we have our first image. I'm going to tick that one because we've translated it correctly. Next, we need to reflect the shape in the blue line. So our blue dotted line is the reflection line. I need to figure out how far down to draw it. So if I pick this bottom left corner of the arrow as my starting point, that's 1, 2, 3 squares above the blue line. So I'm going to start my upside down arrow 1, 2, 3 squares below the blue line, just here. And the same thing for the bottom right hand corner, 1, 2, 3 squares above the blue line. So I'm going 1, 2, 3 squares below that blue line. And I can start to draw in my arrow. I know that the stem part of my arrow is 3 squares long, so I can draw in my 3 squares long on both sides. I know that the very point of my arrow is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares above the dotted line. So it'll be 8 squares below. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's where the point of my arrow goes. And that's probably enough points for me to use to draw in the reflection of my arrow. And that's the second image. So we've done one translation where we slid it over and one reflection in the blue line. Next thing we need to do is translate the shape 5 to the right and 4 up. I'm going to pick once again the point of my arrow to be my first translation point. I'm going to move it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the right and 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces up. And that's where the new point of my arrow is going. Next, I'll do the top right hand corner. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the right and 1, 2, 3, 4 up. And that's where that corner is going to go. You can translate as many points as you want as long as you are clear about which point you're translating and you move it 5 spaces to the right and 4 spaces up. For me, I think that's enough points for me to sketch my arrow. So I can draw in the rest of the arrow like this. And so we've translated it for a second time. We can tick that third one. And lastly, we want to reflect the shape in the red line this time, the vertical red line. So I'm going to start with this top right hand point, and that's 1, 2, 3 squares from the line. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 squares on the opposite direction. This point here is 1, 2 squares from the line. So I'm going to go 1, 2 squares and draw that matching point. The point or the top vertex of my arrow is 1, 2, 3, 4 squares to the right to the left of the line. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 squares to the right of the line and draw the point. You can count as many points as you need. Once you've got enough, you can draw in the reflection of that arrow. So you can see our arrow hasn't changed. It's just been slid around and flipped over. And we've ended up from our original object here to the final image that's been translated and then reflected and then translated and reflected again. And we can tick off that final reflection.